Hello, fellas. Now we're on to the second part of building a custom fight. In this part, we're actually going to be trying to make sure that the game doesn't crash as soon as we get in. Although, we'd have a little bit of a surprise. I did actually already do that. The reason for that is mainly so I don't embarrass myself by making by making it look like I don't know what I was doing. So I made sure I knew what I was doing. But don't worry, we'll go over what I did, what changes I made to make it suddenly start working. So, no worries there. We're gonna wait for this to boot up real quick. Gonna just close that one. And we're gonna open up the File Explorer. And I did actually do something cool in it, and I think you'll like it. So as you can see, we did a couple of things. For one, it did not immediately crash as soon as we went in. Cut to the clip where it immediately crashed as soon as we went in last time. It immediately crashed as soon as we went in last time. Basically, we need a couple of things in order for it to not immediately crash when we get into the game. And also, as you can see, there's some other things going on here that we did not go over, like this sprite here. This is actually an object, so now we're going to go over the object library, and here is the enemy. Technically this is the enemy, even though the game says this is the enemy. This is actually your foe. And as you can see, they're animated. This one's also technically animated, but it's less animated. We'll go over that later. It's technically just changing an image, but you get the point. This is animated, this is moving. Though, of course, the moment we make a move, it's gonna crash because there's no game logic in. If it doesn't have any game logic, it doesn't know what to do, so we're gonna fix that in the next part. For now, we already have a lot to go over, as you can tell. So, for one, we need to go over the fight details folder and the boss sprite folder, because those are the two main things that are going to make sure your game doesn't crash as soon as we get into it. So let's go over to the fight details. We can't tell because I believe I muted the game, but there is actually music going on here. And you do actually need music for the game to boot up at all, because it starts the music on boot, or at least on boot of the custom fight. So fill out start volume and what music and library to play. They should both be pretty self-explanatory. Start volume, I recommend putting in BGM volume, because if you put in BGM volume, it'll use the user's volume toggle as opposed to whatever number you put in. You might be asking, well, why don't we just do that by default always? Well, if you leave it blank, it will do that. But just put in BGM volume and we should be good. Though, of course, either way, we have volume mixer, so not the most necessary, but it'll be nice to have in case you want to put in a different volume, like yours is just really way too loud, or your music is really way too loud. Even though you can edit that in Audacity, you have the option to do it here as well. Then, of course, this one, just put in the music that you played, or that you want to play throughout the fight. I just took a track from a different part of the game and put it in here as a demonstration. But one thing you must make sure, and this is listed in the documentation, your file format must be a .ogg file. This is the only way GameMaker will take in your music file. So that's actually pretty simple. Just slap your file, sorry. Just whatever you use to make music, if it's FL Studio or GarageBand, just export. If it can, export it as an OGG. If it can't, export it as an MP3 and then use like Audacity or some file converter online to convert it to an OGG. It won't really make a difference either way. I think OGG is a little higher fidelity, so you shouldn't lose anything if you do it that way. if you convert it from a WAV to an OGG, you might lose some of the... It'll get compressed a bit, probably. So I recommend MP3 up to OGG as opposed to WAV down to OGG. Next, the background image. Most of this should be familiar. You shouldn't need me to re-explain most of it. We'll go over the animation later when we go over this guy over here. I guess we'll just show what I recommend. The X origin I recommend being 0, and the Y origin I also recommend being 0. Although I guess I should go over. GameMaker works a little bit differently with its X coordinate, and you'll see it here where I put... Oh wait, no, not that one. The Y start, there we go. Y start is actually also -10, which is weird because that means that this corner up here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this corner up here, that means that's 0, 0. So that means that up here is 0, down here would be like, I believe 700 or something. Meaning the higher the number, the lower on the screen it is, and the lower the number, the higher on the screen it is. That's a little weird to get used to, but once you know it, it doesn't really make that big of a difference. You just have to know that for your path traveling and stuff. For now, though, just put your Y origin and your X origin both at 0. Put both of the Y start and X start at -10, so it could be, so you can guarantee that that all your background will be on the screen. And then your X scale and Y scale, whatever number it takes to make them to make your background completely visible. I recommend around 3 for both of them. But of course, tweak that as you need. Now then, we do actually need to go over depth. Depth in GameMaker is basically the overlaying, like how will GameMaker handle it being overlaid. For example, this guy is behind the background and this guy is in front of all of it. And of course the UI is above all of those. So the depth is what handles what goes over what. Generally speaking, the lower the number, the closer, the more to the front it'll be. I like to think of it as the lower the number, the closer to the camera it is, and the higher the number, the farther away from the camera it is. You can also think of it as the distance from the camera, even though negative depth does exist. Let's just ignore that for now, just think of it that way. The absolute farthest away and anything can be from the camera without just completely disappearing is 500. So everything must be at least below 500 in terms of depth. In terms of the negative part of that, it can be anything. It doesn't really matter. I will say the UI is 0 depth, so everything should be taking that into account. But yeah, that's actually that gone over. These parts actually don't matter for now. Filter effects will go over later, but for now, that basically you could put like an overlay. Let's put a basic one. Let's put baked, and we also have to put false, even though it won't really matter right now. And if we restart the fight, it'll apply that filter. While it's rebooting, we'll go over player and enemy stats. Enemy has 2 stats, max HP and start health. They should both be pretty self-explanatory. And as you can see, there's the filter. Baked does not look very good with this filter. What is up with those trees? Alright, I'm dying. Let's not do that. We'll put that back to normal. But yeah, basically, in the documentation, it'll explain that more. We'll explain it more in the next part. But basically, you can put in any 3 filters you want from the ones that are pre-made. Okay, let's go back to the player and enemy stats. Max HP and start health should be pretty self-explanatory. Basically, if you have a move where the enemy heals, you can set their maximum HP so they can't go above that, and their start health is just whatever they start with. So they don't have to start with the same amount of health as their maximum. But if you want to make sure that they can't heal past their max health, or like their start health, so like say they started at 80 and you want that to be the maximum, set this to also be 80. So it's pretty simple. Just put in two numbers. Even if this is higher than that, that doesn't matter. All that means is that it's going to go back down to the maximum HP. So just any two numbers, it doesn't matter. Whatever makes your fight fun. Player. This is actually interesting because you can use their current progress in their save file. You just put true or false. For now, I just put true, so I didn't have to fill out all this. But if you're not using the current progress, you do have to fill them out manually, and it's an either or thing. You can't have I want to keep damage, but also I want to change the health. You have to do one or the other. But for most of these, it should make sense, like command power and player HP and damage. That's just straight up setting it. So you can so it'll just straight up be the number. There's command power upgrades, weapon upgrades, mini skill, and I believe real skill, which do need some explanation. I'll probably put like a table for each of them up, but it's also in the documentation, so refer to that. So that you can know what number makes what skill, what makes what part of it what. It's not as simple as just putting in whatever, like putting in tough guy or something. You have to actually put in the number that associates with it, because it takes the number from there and gives it directly to the game. But again, if you don't want to mess with that, you can just use this, and this will be completely ignored. So, you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry if you don't want to. If you want to make your fight more tailor-made, you can mess with it. And finally, we have the boss sprite. Most of it is basically the same thing. We have the reoccurrence of the depth. So, basically just take what I said before and apply it here as well. Except now, we're going to go over the animation. Oh, and I guess this stuff. Basically, when when you hit the enemy, it'll display this image instead of this image, and when you defeat them, it'll display the image listed here instead of this image or this image. If you don't want a different sprite for those, you can just put in the same sprite. For example, I put mouse sketch here for both image to display when hurt and image to display when defeated. Now, obviously, we can't exactly hurt him because we don't have game logic, and the game will crash if I even make one of these moves. But let's say I did attack him, it would change it to this sprite when it does, and that sprite is probably a sketch. Well, not this kind of sketch, but an actual legitimate sketch. Image library. Yeah, there it is. I'll put it up on screen. Or, I guess it's already covering the entire screen, so whatever, it doesn't matter. What? Go away. Okay, now we have to go over how is this getting animated. It's simple, but also a little tricky to get it at first. As you can see, the sprites these are each of the frames of animation, and all your frames of animation need to be on one image in a strip style format like this. In other words, each frame of animation must be side by side, and they must be equally distanced apart. I should have silenced my phone before I recorded this. Oh well. Future editing me can cut that out. Or future editing me can be a jerk and not cut that out and embarrass me even more. What will future editing me choose? I paused so that future editing me can put a text box here. Anyway. to? Yeah, all your frames of animation must be side by side. They must be the same size. Although, as you can see here, I didn't make them technically the same size. I'm also just noticing this pixel here. I'm going to have to fix that later. Oh, well, who cares? It'll be an Easter egg. What is it? Okay, anyway. The point is, they must all be... Because they're going to be the same image, right? As you can see here, it's becoming the same image. So they must all be the same size, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have to cover the same area. So you can have parts of it be transparent, like the border here, so that you can make it easier so that some things don't overlap. And that is a thing that can happen. For example, if this guy was a little more into this guy, he might actually pop up in the next frame of animation and have his current frame cut off, and then the part that's cut off will appear in the next frame of animation. That's actually happened before. Let me see if I can... I'll put it up on screen, but basically there was a part... There was the first attempt at it in the Miss Tellum fight, where her knuckle here, specifically, would get cut off and then appear in the next frame of animation. So I needed to redraw it so that her knuckle... It looked a little weirder, but ultimately it was better because it didn't get cut off and shown up in the next frame of animation. So you gotta be wary of that. I recommend whatever software you're drawing, if it has built-in guidelines, activate them and then try and set it up so that it'll evenly space it for you so you don't have to keep track of it yourself. For example, I used Procreate, and Procreate did have that tool. I believe, like Krita, it's a desktop open source software, also has those tools, but you can also draw them in your image and then just delete the layer later if your drawing software doesn't have that. But anyway, yeah. Now that we have our 5 frames of animation ready here, oh, whoops, I didn't. We're actually gonna go back to boss details and boss sprite. We have to tweak image speed first. We have to make sure it's greater than 0. If it's less than 0, I believe it'll just play the image backwards, the animation loop backwards. That might be what you want to go for, but basically just make sure it's not 0. And make sure your guy doesn't go zooming through his animation frames, right? So make sure it's like a relatively low number like this. Because this will be a portion of like 30 or 60. I believe it's 30. So whatever frames of animation you have, make sure it's this. Actually, I believe since it's 5, 120. I believe that actually means that I was wrong last time and that it's resetting it automatically to 60. I wonder why I thought it was 30 before. But yeah, 0.05, because my number of frames here I set to 5, because I have 5 frames as you saw before. Make sure that this is set to at least more than 0, but ideally to your amount of frames, because it uses that number to decide how to split your image to get the frames. So since it's split it into 5 frames, it's going to create 4 lines throughout the image, and then cuts it, and then makes this the first frame, then this the second frame, then this the third frame, fourth, fifth, so on and so forth. That's how it animates it, and that's how it does this. And by the way, I made it bigger here. I made it 2 by 2 because, it's a dragon. It gonna be big. So, make sure that, I guess it makes sense for that or something. I don't know where I'm going with this. So, yeah, mess with the X scale, the Y scale, and where it is on the screen so that, it makes sense. Did I close the game? I'm so stupid. Why did I do that? Oh well, whatever. We can show off the other animation we completed. the mouse sketch.png, copy, boss sprite, image to display, boop, boop. And now we're going to boot up game. Alright, game booting up. And now it'll play the mouse one. Although I forgot to change the Y scale. Let me change that back to 1. I will, though, show you how to do a trick, bounds, to get the breathing. You know how in the game the sprites would usually bob up and down to signify like breathing and movement and stuff? Generally that they were alive. Well, you can actually do that here as well. So first you have to specify your minimum, which we're going to put as 0.95, I guess. And then the maximum 1.05. And then the last one is going to be the rate at which it goes up and down. So we're going to go a relatively small number, 0.001. It'll start at this, then it'll keep going up by this rate until it gets to this number, then it'll go back down. Or it'll do something along those lines. The point is, it'll look like that. It appears as if we made the distance too big, so it would actually look better if we just made it 1.00. Actually, I should probably make it 0.00 and then 1.05. And this is actually what I like to call a function, because in this case, as I said in the documentation, instead of inserting a random number, and instead of inserting just straight up a number like here, we're telling the game we want to do something else other than shove a number in there. I mean, technically we did I guess by that logic you can say image to display is also a function, but not really. In this case, this is the function and these are the modifiers. There's a whole list of functions that are compatible in the documentation if you want to go through it. They're compatible throughout various parts of the game. For now, we have bounds, and we actually do a similar one for the object, which we'll go over now. Or should we get... How long have we been going for? 22 minutes? That's fine. We can quickly go over the... object in the background here. Oh yeah, you can also... We'll go over that later, actually. Never mind. It's not relevant now. I was going to say you could put a variable in here, too, so that you don't have to specifically use this function, but we'll go over that later. For now, we want to go over the picture. Most of it is the same. Go figure. Except you'll notice xstart and ystart are not here. Also, object depth is here instead. It's the same thing as all the other depths. It's just named differently. Here we have start rotation. It's the same thing. The only reason it says start is because it can change later on. But the point is, we actually have a lot more here. We'll go over this stuff later. It's not relevant right now to show off how we got this guy doing these things. For now, we did movement position. And in order to get movement position to start working, we actually need to mess with the Z action list. To sum it up, this basically tells the game which folders we want to actually have code executed from. Basically, I did not fill out a single other one of these, just this. Well, more specifically, how to move. And as you can see here, it mostly corresponds with their position. So here, the first one corresponds to clicked on. The second one corresponds to touched by other object. Or at least it should. The documentation will specify it. Editor me will correct me if I'm wrong, but this is how it's usually supposed to go. As you can see, last one, movement or position, is set to 1. Although in this specific case, you still need to fill out start position. That one is not optional. All the how to move and face player, true or false, are optional though, and they can be ignored via this. So let's go over and see what we did to this. Obviously the object is not facing me. It is not rotating itself based off of my mouse, so clearly we just left this blank. And you are actually allowed to. In this case, self-defense kind of will assume that if you left it blank, you don't want it to face the player. So you are allowed to do it in that case. Same thing here. You're allowed to put this you're allowed to leave this blank, and you're allowed to leave this blank. Again, the game will just assume that since they're blank, you don't want to mess with it. This won't always be the case, but in this case, it is. Although, this doesn't mean that you can just leave them out. They still have to be here so that the game knows that they're blank. The main star of the show is move to. Now, normally this would mean that the object would move to a certain place on the certain place that you specify in here. But move to has this interesting thing with it, is that you can use certain functions in it where you can actually create a path using three other functions: bounds, gradual bounds, or variable. We'll go over variable later. Gradual bounds is basically just this, but instead of using a constant number, it slowly, progressively slows down as it gets to its target. And then when it goes the other way, it ramps up and then slows down. Kind of like a sine curve. I'll put it up on the screen, but basically it'll do some kind of curve like this. In terms of its movement speed, anyway. But basically, we set a path via this. First, we have to specify true that we do want to move to. Then once we call one of the specified functions, it'll activate the path. This first portion here is for its x path, and as you can see, I didn't want it to move on the x path, which is true here. We're not moving x in the x coordinate. We're not moving left to right, so it's not. What is happening is we're bouncing up and down. So what's going on there? Well, we're using gradual bounds. A little complicated, but basically, this is your start. This is your gradual bounds multiplier. And this is the rate, I believe. If I'm wrong, I'll correct myself with the text box or something. But that should be it. And basically, because of this, it's bouncing up and down like this. But how is it getting bigger and smaller? How's it doing that? Well, we're actually going to need to go back. Why didn't I just do this before, you might ask? Shut up, I'll say. It's gradual bounds again. You can put it here too, and in fact, you can actually use that for all of them. Wait. You can use that for most of them. The documentation will specify that, but I believe off the top of my head, you can't use it obviously for image to display or number of frames, but I believe all the other ones are on the table. So, go you. You can use functions for all of these, except the ones I just said. But, as you've noticed, this is an object, and I haven't explained the object library. Well, in your in your custom fight document or template, there was object 1, and obviously I just renamed that. In this case, I'm probably going to have to go back and recopy it, but the point is, you rename the folder, ideally after copying it, and you can specify that in your object table of contents. In the object table of contents, you put the new folder name in here, and then you update how many objects there are, in this case 1. This needs to happen, otherwise your object will not be recognized. And if either of these are left blank or empty or don't fit with each other, the game may crash. As you can see, it uses how many objects here for error handling. So if you try and access an object that's out of the range, the game will catch that and just assume that you meant the maximum number, so it basically defaults down to this so the game doesn't crash. That might not necessarily be what you want, but it's better than the game killing itself. So, yeah, that's why this is here, so that the game can tell you, so you can tell the game how many objects there are, and if the number ever gets out of range of that, in terms of object IDs, it'll catch that and make sure it doesn't crash. This is actually similar to how it's going to work in the variable library, except obviously with variables, and we're going to have to go over what all these variables are. But for the most part, that's everything we did to get it looking like this. As you can see, it's actually starting to look like completed or something like that. Amazing, isn't that correct? Now let's try and play. Oh. Right. As you can see, in order to play the game, you need the game. And unfortunately, looking at a game is not what everyone wants to do with their custom fights, so we're going to have to do more in the next part. But we did get farther. We got farther than we did before, and you know what? No one can take that away from you. You made it to the second part. We got into the fight. We filled out all the files we need to. And in the next part, we're going to hopefully be able to get the player to attack. In other words, we'll need to fill out all this. Which means we're also going to need to go over game logic and code execution and all the other functions that these are compatible with. Doesn't that sound fun? I promise it's a lot less complex than I'm making it out to be. I'm trying to be funny, okay? I'm trying not to make this completely boring. Hopefully I'm not failing in that regard. So, yeah. Next part, we're going to make the player be able to attack. And based on, we're just going to have some placeholder attacks for now. Because if we want it to be complex and actually be in a fight that would be in the game, we'll need to fill out the object library, the variable library, and potentially even the sound library. Although the sound library is not very complex, so that shouldn't be too difficult if we need to do that. For now, it'll just be basic things, just to demonstrate how each of them work, right? It's just going to be basic things. And if we have time, we'll also go over the enemy attacks, which is going to basically be a combination of player attacks, player details, and these two libraries. But again, we'll go over that next time. For now, good job. You did it. The custom fight is in the game, and it's looking hopefully somewhat like what the final version of it will look. You know, minus, I'm saying look, not play like. Hopefully you want your fight to actually last more than 3 seconds. We'll see you next time.